we so appreciate having you join us, Kelly. It's a real pleasure, and
Thanks for the honor.
yeah, you're talking about really in your books and your speaking, one of our favorite foundational topics, and that is how to work with people who are different than you. That I think is such a great way to frame that.
Yeah.
And I'd love to hear how you got interested in that topic and led you to become such a really a spokesperson for that effective approach.
Yeah, thank you. Do you want how I got into just that angle or a little bit broader?
Oh, you go as broad as you want to go.
All right, well, I'll quickly tell the whole genesis of this. Is I was living in Texas for 26 years, actually. And between the 80s, the late 80s when I moved there, and then, left about 9 years ago and live in Denver now. But I was working for global ad agencies while there. Okay, so these are the kind of ad agencies that have clients like Toyota and Budweiser and Nike and Kimberly-Clark and like blue chip accounts. And everything about working in that industry with clients like that is that it's all research based, right? Like if they have a marketing problem, you come with research, you come with insights, demographics, focus groups, all that kind of stuff, and then create strategies for solving those problems. So between 1990, and 2000, I saw the demographics changing right in front of my eyes in Texas with the growth of the Hispanic population. And, I could hear more Spanish being spoken around me with my ears. I could see more Hispanic people with my eyes. And I knew that all we needed from, again, a marketing standpoint were the numbers. And then the advertisers would be paying attention. So the 2000 census comes out. And sure enough, at the ad agency that I was working for, and we specialized in Hispanic marketing, the phone started ringing with companies like General Mills saying, do we need to make dulce de leche Cheerios? Like, not kidding, just like, they're like, what's the angle there that we need to penetrate to grow our business with the Hispanic population? Because now we have the numbers. And Levi Strauss is calling it going, do Mexican men like Wranglers, or is that their best brand? Or, do we have a shot at this with Levi's and all that kind of stuff? So I got very interested in marketing to the Hispanic market. And as I became a speaker, I started talking about that because that was what was a big deal in business at that time. And then how it evolved. And my topic was how to market to people not like you. And so as it evolved and I did more and more speaking, I had people saying, well, we have a lot of our conference attendees who are not in marketing or sales, but they're in the customer experience. So then I developed a companion topic called Crafting the Customer Experience for people like not like you, which marketing and customer experience are two sides of the same coin, I think. And then I was sitting in the Milwaukee airport. It's just weird how you can remember where you were for certain things. And I just had the idea, because both of those books were bestsellers and my topics are taking off on those topics in a speaking way because everybody kind of relates to people not like you, But then I thought, well, I've got a marketing one, sales one, and I've got a customer experience one. But what if really the problem is about working with the people in the next cube, or down the hall, or your clients or your customers, or whatever. So I had this idea how to work with people not like you. So I called my editor. I'm sitting in the Milwaukee airport. I got 40 minutes before my flight. I call my editor, and he's great. And I'm like, Richard, I just want to run something past you, for like another book idea. What would you think about like how to work with people not like you? Mm-hmm. And he goes, love it. And he goes, but you have to add in the word leadership or lead. So that's how it became how to work with and lead people not like you. I mean, that was the fastest book deal that was ever done in the history of the world. So then I just started talking about that. And it's one of those evergreen topics from a speaking standpoint. Because I've done it for C-suite executives. I've done it all the way down to, workers on a factory line. I mean, every one of us is working with people who are not like us. And then when you take that framework of that and put it into work, especially in these days where everybody is so afraid of saying the wrong thing or having what they say taken the wrong way, that they'll choose to say nothing. And I don't think that's good for business. I think we have to be able to figure out how to work together, and we have to be able to talk about our differences. And that's actually where the magic is.
Well, I really appreciated on your website how you delineated what you mean by people who are not like us, because it's a broad term.
It can
I
be
want
anything.
just for our viewers to read your bullet list and then ask you a question about it. And then this list could go on forever, but people not like us, morning people versus night owls, introverts versus extroverts, analytical thinkers versus creative thinkers, listeners versus talkers, tech savvy, tech phobic, parents, non-parents, risk takers, risk averse, listeners, talkers. You've got that in twice. I'm sure that's for a good reason.
Oh, well.
Rural, metro, military, civilian. And of course, we could add more to that, but I really appreciated the list. My question is, you've done this so long, you're an expert in this field, you know all the fine points. If you only could pick one skill to help you get along with people that are different from you, what would that primary skill be? I know that's difficult to do that, but what would it be? What would it
It
be?
is difficult, but I think the skill would be ask questions rather than just start, talking and giving your viewpoints. So, and when I say ask questions, what I really mean is solicit someone else's viewpoint.
Yeah.
Because, I always say that that diversity is the bedrock of innovation.
Yeah.
So just think about that, right? Diversity is the bedrock of innovation. I mean, even cave people, when they were primitive people, so somebody at one point, after dragging around a slab of, dirt or clay or whatever, went, wait, what if we round off the corners and we could roll this thing and make a wheel? It was somebody thinking differently about something, And I think that if we can start asking and soliciting someone's viewpoint, that especially if it's a viewpoint that's different from ours, it's really easy to hang out with people who think just like you. That's super easy. There's never any drama or conflict or even, a different point of view. But when we're working with somebody who's not like us, and especially if we're trying to actually move the business forward, right? So this isn't just like coffee conversation in the break room. It can be, but if we're talking about it from being effective, then I think anytime that we can say, Will, how do you see it? Tell me how you see this, right? Because it's a perspective that I simply don't have. And especially maybe when we're not seeing eye to eye on something. If I say, well, we should paint this wall blue, and you say, no, I think we should paint it olive drab or whatever, then I might say, tell me more about that. Why do you think olive is the way to go? Instead of just fighting you and going, no, that'll look stupid, that'll look bad. We have to actually find out what's behind the comment to get to the thinking behind it. And that's where the magic is. And that is why companies that
Muted,
people, what's that?
I think Chris is muted.
Oh, I was just going to add a comment there, Kelly, because in that list of differences Will went through, then this goes to the very point you're talking about. As you went through the list of books, marketing, and then the next one was customer experience, and you said they're typically flip sides of the same coin, or well, at least one hopes so. And it's interesting because doing a lot of the diversity and working with people not like you work that we've done for years, we found some of the biggest differences that people struggle with are between departments. So between marketing and customer experience, or marketing and sales, and they develop these whole stories about the other group that gets in the way of their doing what you're saying, gets in the way of them really asking another question and really trying to understand that person's point of view. And to your point about diversity being the bedrock of innovation, to really approach it from the standpoint of what if we combined our points of view? What if the information we have together was actually more brilliant than either one of ours alone?
And I think more well-rounded.
Yes. And I'm guessing in the work you've done, you've experienced those type of dynamics as well.
I have, and I'll give I think an example that everybody can relate to is I have a client that was really pushing her company. It's a large national U.S. company, but very large, for some extensive customer training for their leaders, the managers of their showrooms and things like this, where the rubber meets the road, and was trying to get it financed by the accounting department or the people who oversee money. And she had her whole position of, here's what we want to do, here's why it's necessary. And accounting was just going like, that's too much. And it's like, too much based on what? Like, what is that opinion of too much based on? And it was this arbitrary comment with an arbitrary number that they had in mind, with absolutely no depth to understanding what this training would be or whatever. So there was a lot of back and forth, and they finally landed on, an approval or whatever. But I thought it was interesting that a department would say that's too much without understanding, like, what exactly does this program entail? How is it going to move our business forward? What are the tangible results we can expect to get from this? How long will this last? Blah, blah, blah. As opposed to just like denied.
Yeah. Yeah. What? Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. It left my client in a bit of a pickle, because she was kind of like, I know that they say that's too much, but I don't know what's okay. And so she's coming to me and she's like, what can we cut? And I'm like, why? And she's like, well, I got to bring down the fee. And I'm like, to what? And she goes, I don't know. And so it's just like this whole cluster, because it was just like, what is the number we're aiming for here that someone has in their head but hasn't shared, nor have they shared a rationale? And I think, to your point, when different departments are working on something, they each have their job. And I get that the finance guy is all about, like, I got to make the numbers work. But there needs to be some context to every discussion and decision that we make.
So I have a very practical question. What's your first move? Like, when there's conflict like that, that's just kind of automatic, too much money, or we don't do that, or it's too
We've never done it that way.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just like automatic. There's no thought to it. There's no number crunching, no vision. What's your first move to unpack that conflict?
Great question. And here's what I tell everybody is lean into that. Okay. So instead of just pushing harder, I always give the example of, if I put my hands against yours and then I pushed on it, you'd push back. We didn't talk about it. You would just do it automatically. So when people are in those conflict situations where they're like, we need to do this. No, you don't. What I tell people to do is lean into it and say, tell me more about that. Tell me more about the thinking behind that. Because without that, you don't have anything to go on other than I'm saying blue and you're saying green, or, I'm saying morning and you're saying night, or whatever. And I don't understand why we're talking that way. So the first move would be to say, okay, tell me how you see it. Tell me how you see it. And I'm going to make this up, but in the case of an example that I just gave, maybe the finance person would say, we're not hitting our numbers right now, and we are under instruction from the top to trim all budgets. Oh, well, that's a piece of information I didn't have, and I need to know, so leaning into it and saying, like, tell me more about that, or tell me how you got to that. And not in a, pardon my language, but in a pissy, confrontational way, but in a sincere way, like, tell me more about that.
Yeah, that's a great question. It kind of reminds me of I've just had some phenomenal mentors in my career. And one of them was a really great negotiator. And he wasn't a negotiator in that he tried to manipulate people. He actually did exactly what you're talking about. And I remember one particular instance, similar to what you're describing, where the comment from the controller in finance, right, was, we have to trim the budgets.
Yeah.
And, now it's real easy to start to say, well, how much, and this, that, and the other. What he went to was, what's the end result that the senior leadership is looking for? They're looking for better net outcome. And then he went on to say, because if we invest this much here, we'll actually have a gain downstream. The ROI will be such that it will more than cover the expense.
Right.
And I thought, wow, now see, that's somebody who was thinking a couple of steps ahead and really being curious. He wasn't trying to, be combative or argue. Exactly. He was trying to think through it with them.
And at the same time, what he did by doing that, Chris, was offer valuable context, right? Because again, the finance guy is just looking at this, or the finance person is just looking at this going, yep, no, yes, no. And he's going, no, wait, on the surface, it looks like it's going to cost this. but it's going to pay dividends fourfold, in 6 months. That's the trajectory here. Whatever. That's the stuff that nobody's having a full conversation.
Yeah. Well, I've been really looking forward to this conversation for many reasons, but partly to ask you this question. It's very personal. Here on Maui, we're digging out from the recent tragedy, and it's heartbreaking what happened with the fire and the aftermath. And I'm somewhat involved in the citizen side, and was speaking the other day at a political meeting. The mayor was there, council members, and I mentioned how dysfunctional compromise is. Because in situations like this, where there's so many differences of viewpoint, the Native Hawaiians, developers, off-islanders, residents,
tourism, yeah.
And I felt kind of bad afterwards because I didn't have time to really fill it out. But my comment was, compromise just makes everybody unhappy. There's a better way to find the truth of a situation and go for that, but it's harder. So I've really been looking forward to asking you for your wisdom on that. How do we not just settle for compromise, but go for the actual best result that's good for everybody?
I think that's a great example and a heartbreaking one. And I've been to your wonderful island 5 times. And so, yeah, my heart goes out to you. I think you're absolutely right. I think in some organizations and their cultures, compromise is where it goes because that's their culture, but it doesn't necessarily always drive the best outcome. So I think I agree with you 100% that it's harder to drive for the best outcome, even if it's not going to make Chris and Will happy.
Yeah.
Because they had a different idea. So I think starting with the result in mind and working backwards from that is how you get to this, as opposed to polling the room and going, what do you think we should do? What do you think? What do you think? Because at that point, everybody's got their stake in the ground. And every time I push and say, yeah, but you're going to go, well, that's why I think this. And so people don't, it's just human nature. People don't abandon their thoughts that quickly. If anything, they double down on them, right? Just because they believe it's right. So I think, and it's really hard to do, is starting with the end outcome. Like, what are we trying to do? Are we trying to get tourism, in your case, somehow back on its feet and market the heck out of what is still beautiful in Maui and the parts of Maui that everybody needs to see in their lifetime or whatever? Or is it about getting people back to work? Or is it about, whatever it might be? All of these, you have this macro problem right now with, 1,000 layers to it. And if you could sit down with your constituents and say, like, can we focus on what is the most important goal now? And I like to call it what's important now. Yeah. Okay. So and that can change literally day to day or week to week, so like, what's important now? And maybe, using my example, maybe it's employment, right? Nothing good is going to come of this if people aren't working and making money. So we have to somehow get people back to work. That's what's important now. Once you do that, then what's important? And then I think as long as there's this shared agreement and shared vision of like, what is it we're driving toward, then people's points of views have more context to them. And then you can actually work with that. And one of the things I like to talk about is to say, sometimes the idea that someone has is flawed, but the thinking behind it isn't. So what happens is, let's say, Will, you present me with an idea and it's not going to work, or whatever. It's just not. And instead of going like, well, yeah, that's a great idea, but it's never going to fly, right? Yeah. And dismissing it summarily. What if I said, that's really an interesting idea. Tell me more about that.
Yeah.
Tell me more about that. It starts to pull the other person into how they came up with that idea. And the idea itself may be flawed. Maybe it's over budget. Maybe it's going to take too long, whatever it is. But the thinking behind it can be genius. And right. So if you don't get to that, that's you're missing something. And I think the other thing I want to say on this is tone matters. Okay, tone matters, because if I say, Chris, how did you come up with that? It sounds really snotty and like I'm basically saying that's a really stupid idea, right? How did you come up with that? But if I say, Will, how did you come up with that?
Yeah. Right.
I mean, so tone, I mean, the words are the same, but the tone changes everything. And people love to share how they came up with ideas. And then you can riff off that and go, I like that. I like that. Now, what if we added this component? And somehow you're moving it forward rather than just shutting it down. And the more people are shut down, the more they're not going to contribute anyway, because then they're going to do the whole, like, nobody listens to what I say anyway.
You know, I love what you're sharing about this, and I think the you know, what were you aiming at? What's important now? Those are all such great questions. I had the real pleasure, honor, really, of being a consultant to Toyota for about 6 years, and yeah, and so
They do
you
it all the
this
time.
this will sound familiar to you. I
Yeah.
loved their whole culture of what they called nemowashi, right? That before a decision was made, the what we're aiming for and the ideas were so well circulated. In other words, if I'm the leader who's trying to create an outcome, I'm going to all the different people and levels involved, and I'm saying, here's what we see we need to accomplish. How would you go about that? And you know that this gets so well circulated that by the time the leader then uh, proposes a solution, it's based on all the feedback they've received, and everybody feels like they had a hand in doing that because the way it's presented is so expertly done that everybody can see how their input was considered
A
and
piece of it. Yeah.
woven in. Yeah, it's they just
Brilliant.
I learned so much from seeing that process in motion, and it's just a great example of how that can be applied in a really productive, highly you know, high performance way.
And it does another thing, and I agree. And I also have worked with Toyota for years and years and years. They're not a perfect company, nobody is, but they're darn close, you know. And one of the things that approach also does is it eliminates the naysayers and the ones who will degrade a decision. You know, like, so you have a decision that's made, and then you got the person who's walking down the hall going, "It's never going to work." Well, nobody asked me, you know, and all the naysayers and the derailers that if their voices are heard and in fact solicited, right? It's not just heard, it's we want to hear from you. This is your department. You tell us, you know, what do you think? It shuts that kind of negativity down.
Yeah, that you know, you've done training, I know, or been a trainer and facilitator. I learned again, great mentor who said, look for the what he referred to as lovable naysayer in your training course, because they're going to present you with really important obstacles and you know, objections, and really lean into them and have that conversation and acknowledge them for their contribution, because that just builds credibility for the whole process. And it goes back to what you're saying, you know, lean into the person who's got the objection.
Well, and we see that all the time with tech companies is they have people, you know, when they're developing coding or platforms or whatever it is, very complex stuff, way above my pay grade. You know, there's all kinds of people on the team who are thinking 5 steps ahead and going, yeah, but that's not going to work if. And that's not a bad thing. They're anticipating problems before they start. So that lovable naysayer, I would agree with that if you're, you know, soliciting from that person and saying, what do you see as the trouble spot here, right? Like, you know, you've got this idea, and then turning it on, because anybody could just shoot things down all day, but then turning it around on them and saying, so how would you avoid that? Or how would you fix that? Because there's a problem with someone just coming up with all the problems, but never helping to find the solution. And I think if you're smart enough to see the problems and anticipate that, then you should be smart enough to be part of the team of people thinking through, how do we avoid that? How do we work around that? And so lovable naysayers, I mean, that's different than a pessimist. You know, the pessimist is the person who says, you know, well, that's never going to work, you know?
So I'd love you to kind of share more about like a high level leadership tip on how to deal with cynics, because we're really talking about the difference between skeptics and cynics. Skeptics can be our best friends because they can see things we don't see, but cynics will just shut things down willy-nilly.
Right.
How do you deal, and again, this is a leadership question, as a leader with the cynics who you recognize have deep personal issues that are getting in the way of their professional conduct. I mean, you might with somebody go, you know what, this guy doesn't have a good relationship with his father. You hear it a little bit, or himself, more likely. How do you deftly lead when you've got somebody who's just so dug in and the root causes aren't something you're going to be able to really address head on?
All you can do, great question, and that's, I think, something that all of your viewers and listeners can relate to. I mean, we've all dealt with that person. I worked with a team one time, and we had a guy who was extremely pessimistic, a total naysayer, and this is going to be so mean, but it really was mean, but it was also true. They nicknamed him behind his back, of course. They nicknamed him Eeyore. Remember Eeyore from Winnie the Pooh?
I played Eeyore. I played Eeyore in a presentation once, and I was very worried about why I was chosen for that part.
You should be. Yeah, and Eeyore was the one that, for anybody who doesn't know, it's like, on Winnie the Pooh, good morning, and he'd say, what's so good about it? I think it was actually classic depression in the case of Eeyore. But the point is, those kinds of individuals can really drag a team down and hurt morale as well as hurting the outcome. And so one of the things that I think is the thing I think is most effective is listen first, right? Because again, the cynic might have a grain of genius in there, all right? And it's wrapped in 98% complaining, and 2% actual real problem or whatever. But don't give them too much oxygen. In other words, I'll just pick you, Chris. Let's say you're the cynic, right? You're always taking that cynical, it's never going to work approach. So if I was the leader of that team, I might say, Chris, this is where we're going. We're on this path. We've made this decision. What we're looking for are the modifications and insights that will help us improve. Because it's really easy to just diss stuff without actually adding anything, I mean, it's easy to just, if I'm making stew, it's easy for you to say, I don't like this stew. But if I say, well, what would you change to make it better? And you're like, I don't know, I just don't like it. Okay, well, we're done here. But I mean, and it's hard to do that because I think with people who, to your point, Will, are sort of like that as a person, right? Their issues are deeper, they're broader, and none of us are psychiatrists at work. Is all we can do is keep focusing on, I understand you're concerned about this, but let's talk about what's working first before we get into what's not working. And then you actually hold them accountable. Okay, so Will, you said that you were convinced that this is a terrible way to go. So what way would you propose instead? Instead of why is it a terrible way? Don't give them the oxygen. They'll go on and on and on, and it still doesn't change anything. Just go straight for, so what would you propose that we do? And a lot of times those people sputter out, right? Then they'll be like, I don't know, but it might, but with it. No, but what would you do? Because obviously you're very concerned. Mm-hmm. So this is the time and place to come up with ideas so that we, avoid what you're suggesting might happen or something. And a lot of times they don't have anything to add. Mm-hmm. It's far easier to be a naysayer or a derailer than it is to be a contributor.
Kidding.
So don't give them any oxygen.
Yeah.
I think one thing that I think you got to do is what Chris was talking about, which is understand the difference between the person who's actually contributing by saying, watch out for this. This could be a problem. Those are legit. But then there's always people who are just pessimists and Debbie Downers, and they just sap the team's energy. I mean, people roll their eyes when they go into a meeting with them.
That's such a good point, and I'm just thinking as we're talking about this whole topic of things that we've encountered in our own consulting and coaching, and an example that sometimes I see, and I was going through this flashes back a year or so with a leader who, in a way, had made the mistake of not getting enough input before proposing a solidified answer. And so therefore, people who weren't necessarily naysayers, but who felt like they'd been overlooked, now their initial response was almost to become obstructionists.
Right.
Right.
No,
and
me. I knew that was going to happen. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. they've done a really great job of learning from that experience. But what I start seeing happening now too is people having a difficult time agreeing upon what the intended result should be. In other words, what is the outcome we should be aiming for here? What's the net gain, or what are we trying to overcome? When you're working with a team or a group who's having difficulty even agreeing upon the outcome or the result, where do you tend to go with that if you're guiding or coaching that group?
Break it into bite-sized pieces. So, we've all heard of a BHAG, right? A big, hairy ass goal, I mean, so Microsoft, it was the BHAG was a computer on every desk, everywhere.
Yeah.
Pretty big goal, but I mean, how do you even begin, right? So you begin with breaking it down into what do we have to do? We have to make the best software, etc. So I would say with those situations, you actually have a meeting and you say, okay, here's where we're going out in the universe. We're going to go to Pluto or something like that, okay? But there's a million decisions and steps that we have to do to actually get there. So what's the first step? And that way, and breaking it down. So let's say a company's goal is to actually gain more followers and more influence on social media. Okay, fair. Well, what social media platforms do we need to be on? What we don't? What kinds of posts, do we even know what our followers follow us for? Why do they follow us? And start doing that diagnostic, like breaking it down into tiny bits so that you can start to actually create the path forward that will get you to the result that you're going toward. It's like working backwards, right? But that's something that everybody can get behind, because when you're in the beginning stages of that, there are no rules. There's no path. There's no right or wrong. You're just soliciting from everybody, like, how do we do the first thing? And in fact, can we agree on what the first thing is? And there might be, and it's a slow process in large companies, especially. That kind of thing is a slow, long process. But I think that, to coin a very overused phrase, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. You just start. You have to start somewhere. So if you start with the goal in mind, but breaking it down into really small pieces. And I feel like a lot of times teams actually will do that. They'll start with the goal. They'll break it into pieces, but the pieces are big chunks.
Yeah.
Big chunks.
Yeah.
And so that's actually hard to do too, because it's sort of like, oh, we're doing this, but wow, we're having problems. Well, maybe we're having problems, or it's going slower, it's costing more, whatever, because we didn't take it down to a granular level. I also think the granular level keeps people inspired, because those little goals become little achievements, and those little achievements start to feel good, like we're making traction. Yep.
Exactly.
Checking
things off the list. Yeah, in the book Chris and I wrote, I think it's in there, Chris, we talked about, you have your to-do list, there's 16 things on it. Well, think about 4 things you've already done. Yeah. So now you've done 1/4 of the things you need to do. You've already checked those off, and that is a good trick for breaking inertia.
Yeah.
I had a question. You have a unique perspective given the world you live in, the people you relate to, and I'm just curious if you have any vision on the trend around all this relative to innovation, because something that kind of breaks my heart, because I'm an innovator and creative guy, is the number of people who hit brick walls in companies with innovation. Great example, Chris and I wrote about this, Kodak. Way back when, 1984, one of their own engineers invented the first digital camera, and it went nowhere. Kodak couldn't get beyond film, so that company tanked.
The death of them.
You've been the leader in the field. So, what do you see? Any encouraging signs that, and I know it's oversimplified, but just as a trend, are the innovators who hit the brick wall gaining more traction or less traction? Is there more openness to getting beyond the status quo, or less? What are you seeing?
I'm definitely seeing a greater commitment to more interaction with and more focus on the people who are coming up with ideas, even if those ideas are ultimately discarded, for exactly what you're talking about. I mean, business, studies and business of diverse teams, and I'm not talking about race, ethnicity, age, and all that. For sure I am, but I'm also talking about if you live in Canada, you know, you might have a different way of looking at things than we do in the United States, or, you know, different perspectives and background. And that's where the gold is getting all these different people to kind of say, what if, what if, or like, And so study after study after study shows that a diverse team outperforms a non-diverse team. Okay, so now we have a business proven, I mean, there's never been a study, not a think tank, not a university, there's never been a study that proves otherwise. So we know factually that diversity of thought fosters success. It's good for business. So what businesses are now waking up to and going, okay, wow, well, you know what, as we have diversified our team and we're hiring all different kinds of people with all different kinds of backgrounds and skills, we are doing better. And so those people who were, the Einsteins and the Kodak guy or whatever, who had this far out idea, ultimately not far out, but far out idea ahead of its time, rather than being dismissed these days because we got to keep printing money here at Kodak, film. They're being given a platform to talk about that, and we're seeing it with climate science. We're seeing it with AI. We're seeing it with education. Education is moving in all kinds of ways as we learn more and more about the brain and how people learn and how children learn. I'm kind of going off on a tangent here, but I don't have kids, but all my friends do. And they have children in schools where, it's rocking chairs instead of desks because there's science that proves that if you rock, your brain absorbs more. What a simple thing. Get rid of the desk, put a rocking chair in there. And who's the person who first came up with that and said, hey, what if we got rid of the desks and put in rocking chairs? In the past, 2 thumbs down. But now they're like, tell us more about that. Why? And I think that there's never been a time that's better than now to be the big thinker, the small thinker. Every idea doesn't have to be global in its scope, but all the ideas are being put on the table and given real audition time, as it were, because businesses have gotten the message. They're like, okay, this is what's good. And nobody wants to miss the next big thing either. We've proven that technology is moving so fast, faster than we are, okay, that how do we not get ahead of it, but just get on board with that? How can we harness technology? And we need those big thinkers. Their time has come. This is it.
No, that's true. And I, as you were talking about the diversity studies and so on, we've done a lot of research in those as well. And one of the things that I found interesting, some of our clients are entirely global. Most of their teams are working, across the globe. So their time zones are different and so on. And what's happened is that as they've learned to work with people who are different than them, who think different than them, who one might be very task oriented and the other one's very relationship oriented. One, needs to build rapport first, whatever those differences might be. Once they get educated on the value of those differences and what each one of those differences can bring to the equation, so to speak, bring to the table, then they become more facile and more agile because they actually understand there's a value to that difference, not just a problem.
Right.
Yeah.
And the value is real. It's not just like, oh, good, we have a woman on the team now. Yay, check woman off the list. It's not that's gone away. And, there's also all kinds of business metrics that have been studied. And one of the things that's been also proven is that people who work on diverse teams, so not the leaders, just all of us working, they actually enjoy their work more. They stay longer. They have better tenure and, less turnover and stuff. And they even have reduced absenteeism. People come to work more often instead of going, oh, I have a cold today. They like working there because it's stimulating.
Yeah. Well, one of the advantages too of getting on the right side of, embracing people who are different than us is the freedom it gives us to be ourselves.
For sure.
I don't have to try and present all perspectives because I can give mine and somebody else can give theirs, and we'll weave them together. I had an example of this the other day. I work with a nonprofit, and we just brought on a new board member, and she's very business savvy. And she has a sister who's a professional in the field we're in. And so she said, well, let's prepare a list of questions to run by my sister. She'll really help us. So I did that. I prepared a list of like 5 or 6 questions. I looked them over. I'm a writer, so I'm also a Virgo, very picky, got to get it just right. Sent it off to her. She immediately responded and said, these are great, and they're all about program development. We should ask Betsy about business development as well. And I looked at it and I went, duh. And then I realized that because I was confident that another person would bring in what wasn't my A game, I could just go full tilt on what my perspective was, which is program development. I'm a writer, it's what I do. And the minute I read what Susan said, I went, thank God for Susan. Isn't that great? I didn't have to try and do that because I'm lousy at that. She's great at that, and her sister's even better. So that's another level to all this, working with people who are different than us, the comfort of relaxing back into our A game, contributing that, and then welcoming what others bring.
Right. I've never talked about this because I've never had the opportunity to do so, but I have to share this with you because it just underscores what you're talking about, Will. I was speaking for a group called the Society of Actuaries, okay? So these are the numbers people behind all insurance, right? How long are you going to live? What's the likelihood that you're going to, they're the actuaries. So a whole bunch of brainiacs in the room, but these are all leaders of different departments of actuaries from all different kinds of company in the insurance industry. And there was a guy before me. I was doing my session on how to work with and lead people, not like you, as a keynote, but there was a guy, a trainer beforehand, who gave everyone, we were sitting in tables, an assignment, a project, and he said, you have 30 minutes to discuss this question or whatever. And so the question was like something like, let's just take educational initiatives, right? Like, we're going to develop educational initiatives. That's the goal or whatever. He said, I want everybody to take 30 minutes and tackle that with nothing but questions. So you couldn't actually discuss it. It was, my jaw was hitting the floor because I was at a table and people were going, well, what is an educational initiative? How do we define educational initiative?
Yeah.
Who deems it to be educational? We were starting at that. And the whole thing went on with, are we going to need people? What kinds of people? Why do we need people? Who's going to write this stuff? Who says it has to be written? Literally, it was just, and there was no right or wrong. We weren't actually supposed to solve anything, but it was amazing how if you don't let people talk, if you just say, ask questions, all they did was build on each other. And I'm sitting there and I'm part of the group and I'm throwing in my questions too, but I'm just sitting there going, this is the greatest exercise ever in the world. And it really takes people away from the minutia and the granular stuff of why it won't work or something. And it was questioning the whole thing, which gets to that big thinking idea, and you could probably do that with anything, but I just want to throw that out there to your listeners and viewers about start asking questions and don't stop.
Yeah, that's brilliant. I love that. That's one we'll have to roll into our repertoire in some ways, because it also it gets beyond me having to focus on my position.
Right.
And instead lets us really go deeply into inquiry.
Mm-hmm.
And if inquiry is done well enough, what comes out the other side is something usually entirely different than what was anticipated at the beginning.
That's where focus groups come into play. Think about what a focus group is. We're going to ask consumers or users or whatever they are, subscribers, pick a thing, what we want to know about this, what they think about this or that or whatever. And I've never been in a focus group in my entire life with a client where there wasn't some major aha moments, and it's because the moderator asked the question a certain way, and then someone maybe in that focus group, said something that, spawned another person saying something, and all of a sudden you're at this aha moment, and it just came out of questions.
Yeah. Well, Socrates was famous for winning every debate by only asking questions.
I never thought about that. It's been a long time since I had my philosophy classes in college, but
Yeah, his opponents would state their position, and he would just keep asking questions until it was obvious that their position was flawed, right? Because they were certain, and I think the real power is in uncertainty. We cannot control the universe, and it's always a moving playing field. And really, to help people accept that we're not going to get it all nailed down. We can't. It's like there's a Jim Collins who talked about the commander's intent, where you make your plan. This is the goal. We're going to take the hill if it's a military operation. Yeah. But then every team member is empowered to change the plan once it starts in action, because the minute you start to do something, the landscape changes completely.
Right. You just
yeah, another relaxation for people who wrestle with the differences between each other is to know that everything's temporary. Everything is adjustable, and we're always going to be tweaking everything.
Another thing about asking questions, I just want to throw this out there, is we were talking about naysayers and derailers and the people who are sort of anti-productive on teams, and there's, lots of different personalities on teams, so we have those. But one of the things I think that people fall into is if they have an idea, they'll ask somebody for their opinion, right? So I'll say, like, Chris and Will, I want to get your bounce on this. All right, what do you think about this? I was thinking about this last night. What do you think about this? We, meaning Will and Chris in this example, when asked, what do you think about this? What do you think about my idea? We tend to think like an auditor. Like, you're asking me to find the flaws in this, or you're asking me how it can, what's wrong with it, right? We never just go, great idea. Like we have to have our little picking at it. And I feel like it's an auditor example because I don't think anybody in the world is ever going to be audited where the auditor is going to go, you're all clean, 100% clean. They always find something, no matter how minor, they find something that should be corrected or fixed or was missed or something. And they don't feel like they've done their job unless they've done that. And so a better way to get to the real contribution, as opposed to somebody just shutting down that idea, is to approach someone and say, Will, Chris, I have an idea and I want your thoughts on how to make it stronger. Because now you've just positioned it where the person is not going to be criticizing, how do I make this stronger? And so I'm not asking you to tear it down. I'm asking you to make it stronger. It's manipulation, but it puts the person that you're talking to in the position and the mindset of, how do I make it better, not what's wrong with it?
Well, yeah, some good neuro-linguistic training there. It reminds me of, it's funny, Will and I have this very similar past before we ever knew each other. We were both in the film and television industry before we got into corporate consulting and so on. And I remember thinking that the negotiations with an agent were such a tremendous waste of time because we went back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And we finally came to a place that at the beginning, we probably could have all said, yeah, that's where we're going to land. So I came up with what I thought was a brilliant idea. And I said this to an agent I knew quite well. We were negotiating on a writing contract for one of her writers. And I said, how about if you just tell me what he has to have and I tell you what my bottom line is? And we try to figure out some solution that will work for both of those. And she said, oh, that'll never work. And I said, why? And she said, because I have to be able to show my client what I got from you that yeah, exactly. In other words, what does anybody need the agent for? That was her unstated concern.
Exactly.
And so my brilliant result was to come up with something similar. And that was, here's what I'm thinking. How would you improve upon this, to make this deal more acceptable to your writer, your actor, whatever it might be. And that went a lot better, but it also cut down the amount of negotiation by about 30%.
Right, because she's got skin in the game then.
Yeah, exactly.
And the part that she added value to by saying, I think I can sell this. This is what, we want in order to sell it. They're going to sell like hell because they came up with the idea. It's not that not invented here or whatever. And I know exactly what you mean, because I work with speakers bureaus and things like that. And with with the advent of the internet 35, 40 years ago, all of a sudden anybody could contact a speaker directly. They didn't need to go through the agents, well, they should, but you know what I'm saying? Like, it's easy to find anybody and to just reach out and say, and so the speakers bureaus actually really, really started working in new, fresh ways to add value, not just to say, here's the speakers, topics, here's their price, are we good to go? By starting to really add value to the process, which was always there, but like it became in the forefront. And that is the easiest thing for anyone to sell, is their own value.
Yeah.
I
Right.
love your approach on that, though, by making that particular agent work for it a little bit and say, so what do you want? What's your thought on this? Because they're going to totally run with their own thoughts and sell the heck out of it.
Yeah. Well, another out of the box approach that worked, I heard about from a young man I worked with years ago who is affiliated with the Harvard program on getting to yes. Might be familiar with that book, Roger Fisher, Bill Urey.
I'm all
And
about it.
they were involved with the SALT negotiations, nuclear limitations between Russia and America. And as the story goes, they were deadlocked. Nothing was moving. And one of the Soviet negotiators was Arbatov, who was this grim character who had never been caught on camera smiling. He was just totally grim. And so they were getting nowhere. And one of the American negotiators showed up for one of their meetings and gave him, for his granddaughter, Katya, a Cabbage Patch doll. That's how long ago it was. And he said, hey, I've got a granddaughter. You've got a granddaughter. My granddaughter loves this doll. I brought one for your granddaughter. They headed for the bar, drank a lot of vodka, solved their issues, and had to promise that they would never admit how they did it, that they would have to report back, that they hammered out this agreement.
We were up all night.
They did it over a Cabbage Patch doll and a hell of a lot of vodka. I've never forgotten the story.
Well, and I love that, because what that shows too is the relationship part of it, and the relationship became or was fostered by this person offering something that was not about work at all, but was personal, which is, this is for your granddaughter, my granddaughter likes it, and bringing that human element to it, which also says, like, we are all human. I see you. I know that after the end of a long, tough day of negotiating, you're going to go home and be with your family and have dinner and watch some TV and play with your granddaughter, and that's the part that never gets seen in the boardroom.
Right. Well, as we close in on our session here, which has been a great conversation, Kelly, thank you again. I wanted to ask you. You touched on the point that I was actually going to ask you about, and that is that it seems when we're working with people who are different than us, one of the biggest helps that often get easily overlooked, especially if things are pressure, is to remember the humanity of everybody that we're involved with. What is it that you recommend that people do to remember and retain the humanity, even when they're working with somebody who maybe has very different take on things than they do?
I can go at that from a fun way or a real way. Let me go real way first. That is to understand that everybody's under pressure. Whatever, pressure at home, pressure financially, pressure from family members. I mean, whatever, everybody's under pressure. And if we can find a way to help, that to me is a big way in, right? So if I know, for example, let's just say, Chris, that you were under a lot of pressure to make something happen at work or whatever, and I know that you need to look good right now. Maybe that's your top priority. Or maybe you took a black eye on something in the past. You're like, I need to recover from this. I mean, then I might approach you and say, what can I do that makes this actually give you a halo, right? Like, what do you need from me to help you get a halo? And I'm not saying he needs my help or anything like that, but that's the kind of thing I think that really gets to our humanity, because someone, might realize, like, wow, they get me. They understand that I'm not being, I'm not trying to be difficult or anything like that. I'm just under a lot of pressure right now, right? And with Will, his whole thing might be different. And I might say something like, tell me something new in your life. What's new? Or, and then maybe a softball again. What's hard right now? Oh, my daughter just dropped out of college. We're so disappointed, and all of a sudden you're like, okay, there's a real personal grief there that's going on. And, do you want to talk about it? I mean, it could be anything. One of the things I like to do is try to find things that we all have in common. And I do this a lot at cocktail parties where I am never going to see anybody again, right? I'm flying in for the Insurance Association of America. I'm hobnobbing with everyone at a cocktail party. I'm not likely to ever see them again, but I have to make conversation. And I hate the whole what do you do? Because it's often a dead end. I'm an accountant. Oh, okay.
Yeah. Dead end.
So what I always ask people is, and it works particularly well in a group or whatever, just a group of 5 people standing around or whatever, I'll say, what's the first concert you ever went to? People, their answers are hilarious. Sometimes it's like New Kids on the Block, and I'm like, okay, you're young. And some people are like, Foghat, and I'm like, oh my god, I remember Foghat. But everybody's been to a concert, and everybody remembers their first one, and it's just kind of a fun way to break the ice and that kind of thing, and just you find the common ground.
That's brilliant. That's brilliant. You gave me a new party trick to.
And people love to talk about it, and it's safe for everybody.
It is.
Nobody has to feel like there's they can't contribute.
Well, Chris, you should tell Kelly about your meeting with Mr. Rogers, because that's a perfect example of it.
You met him?
I did. We were developing. Oh yeah, he was such a gem.
I don't remember him yet.
Yeah, he lived up to everything that one would hope, including the fact that he was actually taller than me, which was surprising. But he was so genuine and so kind. I met him in the elevator at WQED where Mr. Rogers was filmed. We were developing another program with him. And I stepped in there and he just immediately engaged me about, what was I excited about today?
Yeah.
I was like, wow, that was a total Mr. Rogers question. And I loved it.
I'm excited about today.
Yeah.
I'm going to use that because the answer is once again the safe thing. It could be, I'm looking forward to the football game tonight to, again, my daughter's giving birth next week to, our next grandchild. I mean, wow, what a great question. Thank you.
The way I remember it, Chris, and my imagination may have embellished, but the way you originally told me this, that the first words he said to you was, "So, what wonderful things are you up to today?"
That's actually you're better.
What an opening question!
Yeah.
I mean,
what an opening question.
Yeah.
So, and I've used versions of that now because I hate small talk and I don't really like parties because of that. But approaching someone and opening it that way, they just light up. It's like, oh my God.
Yeah.
You have the person who answers that and go, nothing exciting, nothing wonderful, just my job. I mean, has there ever been that
that's, I think that's where, and you're right, Will, you stated that better than I remembered it. And the reason why I know that is I actually developed my own version of that question to ask at parties, which was, so what really lights you up? What have you been passionate about lately? And it's a similar question like you're talking about, Kelly. I think the big part here as we finish up, we're constantly actually surrounded by people who are different than us.
Yeah.
And part of it is to remind each other of our humanity, to connect and figure out how can we work together to create something better than it was when we started.
Well, and to answer your question, Kelly, because it's a very important question, which I faced often, when somebody responds the other way and they're really having trouble, like you don't know, their brother might have just died. So
right.
I come across with this bright, positive.
Or they hate their job.
Yeah, and so
nothing.
So what I have learned to do, and believe me, I really got this dead wrong for a while. What I've learned to do is to switch immediately into major empathy mode. It's like, I feel you. Mm-hmm. I feel you. Oh, I don't get into sympathy because that's never empowering.
Right.
But empathy is different. It's just, oh, I feel you. And mostly then it's about being quiet and listening in case they want to say something, or the subject changes, but now they feel that I'm their ally. I'm not some kind of cheerleader trying to get them out of a funk. People hate that. So
Yeah.
that's what I've learned to do.
Well, brilliant. Well, Kelly, again, so many great comments here that our viewers and listeners are going to enjoy. This will go
Okay.
live in a couple of weeks here. I'll tag you back when it happens. But in the meantime, boy, just keep being brilliant. You're doing a
Oh,
great
thank
job of
you. You
it.
too.
All
You
right.
guys made my day. I'm having a ball. I just want to keep going here, but I know we can't. But I have loved every single second of this. Thank you so much.
You're so welcome.
Thank you.
So
Just
again,
wonderful to talk with you, to meet you. And thank you so much for the work you're doing. I know there's making a big, big difference. Thank you.
thank you for seeing that. I hope that's my little mark on the world.